wonderful welcome from Berlin. Thank you very much. Everybody in this room has a life story to tell, a journey they've traveled, an adventure, and today I'm going to tell you mine. But I want to start off first of all by remembering some really great stories of entrepreneurs who built great global brands. But great global brands don't start at the top. They start often with one person's dream and something that happens to them in life that brings the product alive. And I'm just going to share a few of my favourite stories with you today. There was a man called John Pemberton, American. He was a pharmacist, 1930, 1940. And he created this amazing tonic that made you feel so much better. And he would take this syrup and send it to distributors, and they would mix it with fizzy water or carbonated water. That product was Coca-Cola. But it started off with one man's dream and one man's product. In 1928, there was a doctor called Alexander Fleming. He was a microbiologist in a hospital in St Mary's in the UK. And he would be testing, he couldn't figure out why that when people went to hospital, the wounds and operational scars became infected, and he was trying to find a solution. And he had all these little dishes where he would wipe sort of bacteria in to see how he could help. And what he noticed was that the mold from bread, when he used it, the juice of it, it seemed to counteract bacteria. And he went back and he started a test in his hospital. And the solution was, and what he found was penicillin, a product that changed our world and still today is so important. My last one, I'm going to take to 1964, a year just after I was born. And there was a runner called Phil Knight, whose coach was a man called Bill. And this man loved to run and run and run. These were the two first people to create the Nike running shoe. It came from his desire to run and be a sportsman and the shoes on his feet. The really amazing thing here is the track underneath the tread on the running shoe. Do you know how that was created? It was created with he and his wife sitting with a waffle iron, and they were making waffles one evening. And they found that if they printed into the waffle, it gave a tread. And Nike still to this day use that same lesson of the waffle iron on their tread of their shoe. So great ideas don't often come from places like museums or whatever. They come from the day-to-day, down-to-earthness of normal life. And I was hearing at lunch from William the story of your own brand, Jeunesse, that Randy's knee was very bad and he was needing medical attention. And he found the doctor that he worked with found this serum and this medication that helped with the renewal of his knee. And so yet another company was born. Well, I'm now going to tell you about my story, and that's really all I have. I'm certainly not the smartest or the cleverest person in the room. I'm sure there's lots of you that are much smarter than me. But my journey began in 1963 when I was a young woman, just born, 5th of November 1963. And I was born to two parents. My father was a building contractor, an architect, and my mum worked for Revlon. And when I tell my story all over the world, a lot of people think that I grew up on an estate, a bit like Downton Abbey. I didn't. I grew up on a council estate where there was very little money, very little food in our fridge, and two rooms upstairs, 2 rooms downstairs with a kitchen. And I grew up with two parents who were unbelievably creative, but I was the parent and the adult from the age of 11 in our house. At the weekends, my father was a brilliant artist, amazing, and he also was a member of the Magic Circle. So he, in the afternoon, would perform magic tricks to children for children's parties. He was also a huge gambler and could play poker like no one else I knew. And my mum worked for Revlon. She was a manicurist. And she eventually found her way to this incredible woman called the Countess Labati that taught her about skincare. So as a young child, I learned really important things. You know what I believe in life is nothing is wasted. The adventures, the things that we go through, everything eventually comes back and serves a purpose to either teach us, show us the right way or the wrong way, but to show us how to move forward. And so as a little girl, on a Saturday morning, I would go to the markets with my father to sell his paintings. So from the age of 8, I was there at 6:30 in the morning, setting up the stall, putting all the paintings up, and making my first sale, hopefully by midday, so we could eat for the rest of the week. In the late afternoon, when we got back, we would have a magic show to do. So I would be the magician's assistant, and I'd be the little girl who would bring out the white bunnies that would come from hats, and my pet was a little white dove called Suki, and Suki would sit on my shoulder. And you know the things that I learned? I learned the artistry of entertainment within retail, the importance of storytelling and communication and being at one with your consumer. My mum would teach me the art of skincare and making face creams. And as a very little girl at school, I realised I was really, really hopeless at reading. All the letters would move around on the page, and I realised, and I was told and diagnosed with dyslexia, which is not the terrible disease everyone thinks it is, but it is very difficult to read and write. So I learned to make face creams by solely trusting my nose. I couldn't read a formulation, I could figure out how much beeswax and almond oil and jojoba oil needed to go into the skincare product, but I couldn't read the formulation. So I would have to trust my nose every single step of the way. When the almond oil was burning too much, I could smell it when it had just gone above the degree that it needed to be to bind together. But the love of creating skincare and trusting my nose was just such a powerful thing in my life, and it has never ever left me. I left school at 15 because of dyslexia. I struggled and struggled and struggled. And I left school with no qualifications. I don't have any degrees. I don't have any O-levels, A-levels, CCSEs. I don't think I've ever received anything in my life. In fact, the first honour I received was 2 weeks ago when I was made an honorary professor of luxury at one of our London British universities. But that is the first time I've ever. Well, it's so nice to see you all. I thought there was only about 10 in the front row. How lovely. So I left school with no qualifications, and there I was, just this heap of passion and this desire to not live in the squalor that I had as a child. My first job was in a flower shop, and I absolutely loved it. Why? Because I could trust my nose. I knew every flower, I knew every plant, I knew how to put everything together, and when I would be sent out to go to the flower market to buy product, I knew the ones that had been sitting in the fridge that the stallholder was trying to sell to me cheap. And I said, no, they've been in the fridge for 2 days. And he said, Jo, they haven't. And I said, yes, they have. I can smell it. And so I learned to trust my nose time and time again. I spent the first 6 months in this flower shop, and I have to say I fell in love with being a shopkeeper. And that's never left me either. But one day it was very, very hot summer's day. It was I'd been to the market at 5:30 in the morning. I'd put all the flowers in water, and I'd made a bit of a mess outside, really. And the manageress of the store came out and she screamed at me. And up until that point, I'd been a very laid-back human being. I'd taken all the knocks that life was going to give me, and something snapped in me that day. And I looked at her and I said, "You can do it yourself." I was only 16 years old. I mean, who did I think I was? And I picked up the bucket of water and I threw it over her. Not the smartest thing in the world to do. No, don't clap that. It was not smart to do that. There she was, leaves hanging in her ear, fuming, as you can imagine. And I was really frightened by suddenly what I'd done. And I ran up the street, called Elizabeth Street, and there were two shops, the flower shop and the delicatessen, were owned by the most brilliant man called Justin DeBlanc, and he was this great entrepreneurial guy. And I ran in with Frances in hot pursuit with leaves in her hair, and he looked and he said to me, "You know what, Jo? I see myself in you. Now go to work and go and sit and make sandwiches and serve salads and do whatever you have to do." And I was put back to work in 42 Elizabeth Street. And I'm telling you that story for a reason, which you'll figure out later on. Life always returns and brings us back, and nothing is wasted. Well, my next jobs where I worked in hotels, I can square corner a bed like like an army officer. You can run a 10 pence off a bed I could make. I washed up, I cleaned people's houses, I did anything. I looked after dogs, children, I did anything to survive. And eventually, life brought me back to my love of skincare and making products. I'd met my husband Gary just a few years earlier, and he was training to be a vicar. And we'd met at Bible school. I did 2 years in Bible school with him. And he was training to be a vicar, and I really didn't want to be a vicar's wife, that's all I knew. Fell in love and we got married. We were two young kids, 21 years old, he was 22, we had no money. And he said to me, "What do you really want to do with your life, Jo?" And I said, "You know what, Gary, I want to build a business. I want to build a skincare business." And he said, "Then let's do it." At the time, he was working for a building contractor, and we rented this tiny little apartment in Chelsea. Oh, you didn't see that one. This tiny little apartment in Chelsea, where I started my first skincare clinic. I had so little money, so what you can see is a tray of product and little shutters. What you all can't see is the rest of the flat was completely bare. I had no money and nothing. All I had was this dream and this desire to build a business. We bought a little piece of blue foam that we would roll out every single evening and use it as our bed. And in the day, I'd roll it all up and I would transform this little apartment, that I still own this apartment today because I couldn't bear to part with it. And I would transform it into the most amazing skincare clinic. And I would treat up to 7 people every single day, and they'd lay on this little bed, and I would make every single face mask, every single cleansing cream, every single nourishing cream, and I would sell it to these women. And men, I had a few men as well. But as they left, I decided I wanted to give them all something really special. And I decided that my nose needed to come into play. And so I created a tiny little bottle of bath oil. And that little bath oil, I didn't know at the time, was my golden ticket. That was going to be my ticket to travel around the world and build a global brand. But I didn't know it at the time. And I made these tiny little bottles. They were nutmeg and ginger. And as each lady would come to have her face done, I would hand it to her and say, "Thank you so much." Because it meant I could pay my rent, I could eat, and Gary and I felt like we lived like kings and queens. We had the most amazing adventure. Well, that little business, in a period of 5 years, didn't just double or triple or quadruple. It multiplied to such a degree that everybody wanted the bath oil. the fragrance, the skincare, the candles. And one Christmas, Gary came home from work, and I was standing, it was 3 days before Christmas, and I was standing in a little kitchen that was probably no bigger than 3 of these lecterns, so it's tiny. I had 4 plastic jugs, 2 wooden spoons, and a whole lot of empty plastic bottles, and thousands and thousands and thousands of bottles of bath oil to make for Christmas. And he walked in and he was really cross with me because everything was in a mess. He was tired, he'd been at work all day, it was 10 o'clock, and he walked in with a pizza, and he put it down, and he said, "Jo, I can't live like this anymore. This is just beyond." And there's always those moments, isn't there, in business, when your business suddenly takes on a whole new realm. And he stood there and he said, "We have to do something." And with that, he picked up his pizza and put it in his mouth, and ooh, it tasted of nutmeg and ginger. And he was fuming with me. He then made himself a cup of tea, and as he poured the hot water into the mug, all bubbles came over the top, and I thought, oh, this isn't good. I knew it wasn't. And he said, "Okay, Jo, if we carry on like this, we're not going to stay together. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to go and have a bath." And all I could do was, my heart really sank, because I was thinking, I've just filled that with seashells and I'm scenting them. And he went into the bathroom and the whole bath was full of seashells that I was scenting. Well, he got his way, and in 1979, Gary and I opened our first little shop. After many, and that was our first little shop. It was number 154 Walton Street. And I can't tell you the journey we travelled to get there and open those doors. On the very first day that we opened, this was the queue on the very first day. People were literally standing at the door, banging on the door to get product. It was such an incredible, amazing adventure. And I was standing there, it was just 10:30 in the morning, and a man walked in, pinstripe suit, New York accent, big cigar, and he said, "Is your name Jo Malone?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, I've been sent by a client from New York to put an option together for you to see how you feel. Well, that man offered me $1 million that day for my business to sell and to walk away. $1 million. I hadn't even been opened. I hadn't even shut the door for the first day. And as I heard him talk, I thought, you know, if I sell this business right now, I'm going to rob myself of an adventure that will change my life. I just knew it within me. But the other half was thinking, but if I do sell it, I might buy Gary and I a double bed. The dream won. And I said, "Thank you very much." Thank you very much, but no thank you. We had 5 years in Walton Street that was absolutely unbelievable. The journeys we travelled, the adventures that we had. I remember turning over the first £1 million, which in any business is everyone says it's your first 10 million. Do you know what? It's not. That first million, when you hit it, and you know you've earned every single penny yourself, that's a big deal. And it was Christmas Eve. And Gary and I were standing in the shop, and we shut the door, and we did the till, and worked out what we were on. And we were £364 short of our first million. And I was so excited. And I said, "Let's open the door. We can't shut now on Christmas Eve." So we opened the door again, and I have to say, ladies, it was all men who were running in that door, trying to buy stocking fillers or a fragrance for their wife or their daughter. Hour and a half later, the last man came in and he said, "Jo, can I have the cheapest thing that you have?" And I remember standing there thinking, this is the man that's going to take us over the million, and he wants the cheapest thing. And it was a little shower gel wrapped in cellophane, really funny little printed labels, and I handed it to him and I said, "Merry Christmas," and handed him a bottle of champagne. And he looked at me and he said, "Jo Malone, you're never going to make a successful business if you treat everyone like this. How wrong was he? Growth costs, doesn't it? It costs of ourselves when we run a business, but it also costs us financially. And as we started to open up, Jo Malone started to spread literally round the world. I flew to Chicago, I had lunch with Oprah, I went to do her show, I flew to New York, I would address all these amazing people, go to embassies, share my story. I was flying, but as we started to open up all the territories, my little pool of money got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and my product line started to become not 6 products a year, but 1 product a year. And the teams in each city as we opened up, from San Francisco to Sydney, to Paris, to Brazil, all over, those teams became tighter and tighter to run, and I knew at some point that we were going to have to take on a partner or franchise or however we were going to do it, but I needed help and I needed it quick. Over those 5 years, there was a family that came through our door many times, and that was the Lauder Corporation. And one by one, they would say to me, you know what, Jo, we can really build Jo Malone together globally. And I said, no, thank you. And then the second one came, no, thank you. It wasn't until I met the most amazing man called Mr. Leonard Lauder that I looked at him, and I remember having breakfast with him in his apartment one morning. And I said to him, tell me what you think an entrepreneur is. And he told this incredible story of his mum, and how when his mum started in New York City, see, everything begins somewhere. How she had this idea for fragrance, and her first product was a bath oil. And her first deal she struck with the department store was because she took bath oils into the department store and dropped them on the floor, so they exploded, and everyone in the department store wanted to know what the fragrance was. How good was that? So in 1999, I made the decision that Estee Lauder would be a great partner to partner with. And so I sold my business to them. I had 2 years of unbelievable happiness and adventures, traveling the world, working with some of the greatest people, from photographers to scientists to professors. I loved every single minute. But life sometimes throws you a curveball. I was only 38 years old. I was a kid that came from nothing. I had no qualifications, and suddenly there I was in New York City, in room 4206 in the Four Seasons Hotel, which is right on the corner overlooking the park. There I was working with the most amazing people. I had a 2-year-old little boy who was so adorable, and my life was going from strength to strength. And then suddenly, this curveball came from nowhere, and I didn't anticipate it. I was in the Four Seasons one morning getting ready to go to a photographic shoot, and I suddenly found a lump in my breast. And I remember thinking, ooh, women my age don't get cancer. I'm 38 years old, I'm too young for that. Wrong, they do. I flew back to London, and within 3 days, I was sitting in a hospital being given the worst news I had ever had in my life, and I couldn't believe it. How cruel was life? It had given me everything with one hand and then suddenly just snatched it from me. And all that mattered to me was not the business, was not bath oil, was not money, it was my son and my husband. That was all I thought about. And I came home from that hospital appointment. They told me that I had 9 months possibly to live. I couldn't believe it. And I sat there on my bed and I sobbed and sobbed and sobbed until I put my Jo head on. And I sat there and I thought, Jo, if you have everything you have been told in your life, you'll never make anything of your life, Jo Malone. Why? Because I had dyslexia. You'll never be able to be a shopkeeper. You'll never survive in Walton Street. If you had listened every single time someone had told you you couldn't do something, you would never be where you are. Now get up and find a way. And I did. I might get a little choked. I found the most amazing doctor called Dr. Larry Norton through the amazing Evelyn Lauder. And I went to New York City and I fought cancer like I built a business. I gave it everything. I was one of the very first women to take chemotherapy every 5 days. And I did it for a whole year. I'd done the first cycle, it hadn't worked, and I had to go back and do it all over again. It was a grueling. If there's anybody, which I'm sure there is in this audience, you never give up. You never quit. You never believe that tomorrow won't be different. And that is how I lived my life for a whole year. Well, I came back after the whole year, and I was standing in Madison Avenue, getting ready to build Jo Malone again. We'd opened a shop. My hair was short, they'd just come back. And I sat there in the corner of the shop and I suddenly knew that it was time for me to move on. And it felt really painful, that moment. But I knew it was the right thing. I was frightened cancer may come back. And I didn't want to be traveling around the world while my son was just 3-4 years old. So in 2006, 5 years after I'd sold the company, I exited from Jo Malone and I left. I remember the last day in Sloane Street, my beloved shop, putting the bottles on the shelves and turning the key. And I knew I'd made a mistake. I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. I'd left the brand that I'd stood at the kitchen sink and built. But everything, have you ever been in that situation where everything is moving too fast and you can't stop it? And I had to go through with it. The only thing I can think it might be like is if you're walking up the aisle and the man at the end of the aisle, you think, I don't want to marry him. Not that I ever thought that with Gary. But it's the only thing I can think, maybe that's what it felt like. It was, what have I done? I'm leaving the brand that I love. I'm leaving my best friend. But I did, and I walked away. I honoured everything that was agreed, and out I went. Well, when you sell a business, you have what's called a 5-year lockout, and that's what I had. So for 5 years, I was prevented from being part of any cosmetic, any fragrance industry, and oh boy, in that first 24 hours of leaving, I knew I'd made a big mistake. 5 years of not creating fragrance was just unbearable. But I put my Jo head on. Come on, Jo, what else can you do? So I thought, you know what? Everyone's asked me to sit on a board. I'll sit on a board. I've never sat on a board before, and I thought, you know, I'll learn. And so off I went. Well, people ask you to sit on boards, and they say, we want you here, Jo, because you're entrepreneurial, and we want to know what you really think. They really don't. I caused havoc everywhere I went, because I told them what I thought. I then decided, you know what? How about making a television show? And that's what I did. I made a show called High Street Dreams, and I thought, if I can't do it for myself, I'm going to help other entrepreneurs build. And that's what I did. For the next 18 months, we put a format together and we created High Street Dreams. It was while making that TV show, and as I came towards the end of those 5 years and that lockout was nearly over, I was standing in a garden, filling bottles of chili sauce with this amazing Indian family. And there I was, and suddenly this voice said to me, it's time to go back, Jo. It's time to go back to what you really love to do. I heard that voice, and everything within me just wanted to return back to build a business with cosmetics and fragrance all over again. And so in 2011, we sat round the kitchen table. That was the very first morning. I don't look that glamorous, do I? Because it was very early. I sat round my kitchen table with 4 people, my husband, Charlotte, Angela, and myself, and we put a plan together to build another global brand. And just as I said in the beginning, businesses start somewhere, and they always start with a dream. Jo Loves was born. The name, the first fragrance, pomelo. But we needed a home. We needed somewhere that I could call home for our fragrance and our new fragrance brand, Jo Loves. My 49th birthday, my husband gave me a little tiny box, and it looked like diamonds, but it wasn't. It was a key. And he said to me, Jo, go be a shopkeeper again, because you are an absolute nightmare at home. And so, in 2013, we opened the doors to number 42 Elizabeth Street. It had been exactly the same shop 34 years previous. I'd stood in there and been told off for throwing a bucket of water. Life brings you full circle, takes you back to where you first started, with values, wisdom, inspiration. It has been a journey of a lifetime, I can't tell you. I didn't want to recreate Jo Malone all over again. I wanted to do it differently. I felt different as the creator and the heartbeat, but where on earth was I going to start? And I asked myself these 3 questions, which I think are really important to any entrepreneur and any person that's trying to regenerate something or recreate something. Does potential exist within me? What do I have? Is it just a dream? Is it just an adventure I want to travel? What is it I really have within me? How can I reinvent myself? What can I do to create something and do it all over again? I missed that world more than anything. And where on earth did I start? Well, it starts with the 3 things that every entrepreneur and every business builder needs: passion, resilience, creativity. I needed to have passion for what I did and my product as much as falling in love with Gary for the first time. I needed to love my brand and my product in that same way. It needed to make my heart beat. All the things and all the tough things that had happened to me had taught me resilience. It had taught me no matter what, no matter how many times someone says no, I have been able to find a way. That was enough to reinvent myself. But where did I start? I started by looking in the mirror at creativity. Sorry, I'm not very good with this. How was I going to do it differently? How was I going to use inspiration? I decided I was going to create a fragrance tapas bar for your nose. So you don't eat anything as you sit there. You have 4 courses of tapas that arrive for your nose. Your bath cologne appears from hot steaming tagines with chopsticks and dim sum. Your shower gels come from cocktail shakers. We make huge margaritas that froth and bubble. And your body lotion comes from veloute guns, which we paint you all over with fragrance. I have been able to still take that same passion and that love of fragrance, but recreate, regenerate myself in a whole different way. What was I going to do? Thank you. What was I going to do with candles? How could I recreate candle? I mean, everyone says, how do you recreate the wheel? But how was I going to recreate a candle? Well, I did. I created a candle studio, which is like a cocktail bar. And you actually come and you make your own candles. It comes in a base and a shot. Do you know that candle is patented? No one has ever been able to patent the design of a candle, but we did. Our one little shop. That passion I had for my industry, that resilience to think differently, that creativity to turn it round and make it a physical product. The Patent Office issued us with a worldwide patent for our candle. I'm so proud of that. It doesn't matter how many times people tell you you can't. I'm telling you, you can. These are my 5 best friends that have stood by my side, building Jo Malone for the first time with 4 plastic jugs and coming back to recreate myself for the second time. And this is almost like my little compass that I want to hand to you. You just take it. If you don't want it, it's absolutely fine. But these 5 things are like my checklist. I check where my brand is, where my company is, where my heart is, and what I'm doing. The first one, inspiration. You need to have that passion. Who remembers in this room? Can I just have the lights up for a second? Who remembers their first kiss? Come on, you lot. You all remember your first kiss. Now, I'm not going to get you to share stories.
Translation takes a bit longer.
But you know what? People have to fall in love with your brand and remember it like your first kiss. The passion and the inspiration behind who you are. Be prepared to do it differently. The world, as we see, is changing by the minute. You leaders, your ways of Brexit for us is going to change the way business is done and life. We have the great thing about entrepreneurs and what we have in bucket loads is we know how to think differently. If the front door doesn't open, find the back door. If the back door doesn't open, find a ladder. If you can't find the ladder, build a tunnel. Find a way of doing it differently. Stamp your identity on everything you do. Be your business. Be your brand. When we created Jo Loves for the first time, everyone remembered me as a cream and black box with a beautiful black grey ribbon, of which I'm truly proud of. I built that from nothing. But how on earth was I going to create myself all over again? And I went through nearly £200,000 looking at how I was going to package myself. I got it horribly wrong in the first go, and then suddenly I returned to just this white canvas, remembering my dad as he painted. But how was anyone going to know that was Jo? That was me, the person. And I was sitting at my desk one day. I was about to go to Shanghai in China to go and share my story through the whole of the Far East. And I had a little bottle of red nail varnish sitting on the side and a whole lot of white Jo Loves labels. And I looked at it and I looked out at this running track where all these kids were running. And I picked up a pencil, stuck it in the nail varnish and dropped it on the label. And I looked, and there in front of me, for no less than £2, was the answer. Because you see that little red dot, because I'm dyslexic, when I approve a product, I red dot it, so that my team and anyone knows to take that product to the next level. The red dot signified my fingerprint and my creativity. So often the answers we look for are right in front of us. We just have to have those moments of sitting and realizing they're right there. Create a hunger for your product. Ignite it. It's up to you. It doesn't matter whether you have £1 million in your pocket or £1. You'll do it differently, but you know something? The people I know who have £1 in their pocket, it's really strange. They come up with the best ideas. And sometimes when you have so much, we do so little. And when we have so little, we do so much. When we first went to New York City, it's true, isn't it? When I first went to New York City, we had a zero budget for marketing, and it terrified me. And this was years and years and years ago. We were opening in Bergdorf Goodman. We had a wonderful site, but no one knew who Jo Malone was. How on earth were we going to get it out there? And Gary and I were sitting one night, and I said, how much money do I have? And he said, there isn't any money left, Jo. He said, you have product and you have bags. So all the product went out to over 100 people, and I asked them for help to send out the gifts in the next 3 months, let them know we were opening. And I said, but what am I going to do with the bags? And he started to pack them all up with the ribbons on the top. And he gave 10 to me, and he said, walk up the street. I said, well, what good is that going to do? They're empty bags. He said, no one else knows that. We took 100 people, and each gave them 10 bags. And they walked around the streets of New York City for 3 months with empty bags, but no one else knew that. So by the time we opened, had opened, everyone knew the brand. Everyone recognized it because they'd seen the bags walking all around. You know, we turned over our first $1 million in the first Christmas. And if we hadn't walked around New York City with empty bags, that would never have happened. The last thing is seize the moment. Use your instinct. Instinct is such an amazing thing, and the world today is telling us don't trust it. I'm telling you, trust it. If something doesn't feel right in life, it normally isn't. And if something just tells you to push on, you take that one more step of courage and that faith. And you use your instinct and you seize the moment. And sometimes your feet will leave the floor and it will be terrifying. But you know what? Your feet will always come down somewhere along the line. Don't worry about that. Travel that adventure, travel that journey. Do things that are unexpected. I went to see a movie this week. It's one of the most amazing movies I've ever seen in my life, and it changed. I really needed to see it. I was having such a low day. The business was so heavy on my back, and I was really thinking, why have I done this? And I went to see the movie about the airline captain that brought the plane down in the Hudson River. Does anyone ever remember that? He was flying a plane out of, I think it was LaGuardia, and a flight of birds flew into his engines. And both engines went plus his thrust, which meant he had no power in his plane at all. He had 155 passengers on board this flight, and their children and grandparents. And this man had to seize the moment and use his instinct. The control tower told him that the nearest runway was 7 miles away, and he could make it. He knew he couldn't. All the training that he had gone through as a child, he had done gliding, he had flown planes all his life. His instinct was the only thing he had at that moment. Otherwise, he knew there were 155 people that were going to die that day. Well, that man glided that plane in, and he brought that plane down and landed it. It makes me so emotional. On the Hudson River, and he saved 155 lives that day. How amazing. You use your instinct. You use what you think is right, and you do what you believe is right. You create the world in which you want to live in, and other people want to work and live with you. We're going to open up for questions in a minute, but I'm going to end on just one thing, which is my favourite quote. I tell myself this every single day, especially after Brexit, and every single morning, and it is, for man to discover new oceans, he must first have the courage to lose sight of the shore. there was one fragrance. There's always that one product. Remember, Coca-Cola, your own product, penicillin. My best friend is a fragrance called Pomelo. And after 5 years of not creating fragrance, I thought I could never do it again. And this fragrance whispered in my ear as I was standing on a beach in the Turks and Caicos and said, you trust your instinct, Jo. You take creativity with both hands. You use your dyslexia and you go change the world again with a global brand. And this next piece of VT is the little story of my best friend, Pomelo. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
A clean, crisp citrus cologne, inspired by sunny weatherlies. Each scent has its own story, full of unique ingredients which come alive through fragrance tapas. From scented steam to foams swept on with paintbrush. Jo Loves is my fragrance library, and each box is full of moments and memories where imagination and creativity meet. Jo Loves, created by me, Jo Malone.
Thank you.
Jo, that was amazing. Did you guys enjoy it? Before we wrap today, we just wanted to give you guys a chance to have some input, and so we've got some amazing questions that came in on Facebook. And Jo, there was one takeaway that we'd love for you to share with our audience. Can you just tell us what's one important habit that you attribute to your success? One thing you do every day.
I've got lots of habits. I think the biggest one is find 20 minutes of inspiration a day. But the movie was mine the other day. I sat there and I realized I wasn't just watching a movie, I felt this incredible story. And I think 20 minutes of inspiration, it takes 21 days for something to become a habit. And I've had my brain scanned so many times because of cancer. And what they saw was creativity brings alive the primeval part of the brain. After just a few days of finding something that inspires you, something that makes your heart beat and you just feel differently, you start to look at your diet, look at your life, and solution solve. It's problem solve, sorry. You find solutions for things that you're really, really worried about. And every single day,